Did you know the US spends more per capita on health and healthcare than any nation on earth by a huge margin, and our health outcomes are among the lowest? Why is that? Well, join me as I connect with Dr. Joel Gator Warsh, a popular functional medicine pediatrician in Los Angeles, as we dive deep into how families get healthy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Next Level Healing. I'm your host, Dr. Tara Perry. My guest today is Dr. Joel Gator Warsh. He is a board-certified pediatrician in Los Angeles, specializing in parenting, wellness, and integrative medicine. He is the author of Parenting at Your Child's Pace, the Integrative Pediatrician's Guide to the First 3 Years. After completing his pediatric medicine training at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, he then worked in private practice in Beverly Hills before founding his current practice, Integrative Pediatrics. He has published research in peer-reviewed journals on topics including childhood injuries, obesity, and physical activity. Welcome to Next Level Healing, Dr. Joel.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to chat.
So I grew up in kind of a weird household. My dad was on the board of the Price Pottinger Foundation, so I grew up with no white sugar and no white flour in my house. I'm curious to see how you've seen things evolve and change over the last time since you've been in practice.
I think what we're seeing, unfortunately, I mean, from the negative side would be we're seeing an increase in chronic disease. So we're seeing kids overall getting sicker and sicker. And I think that's really unfortunate that we haven't really been talking about it all that much until recently. It's certainly something we're talking about a lot more in the last year. But before that, it was something that was very, it wasn't mainstream for sure. And so I think that it's good that we are talking about it, but it's unfortunate that we're moving in the wrong direction. We have seen a decrease in physical activity. We've seen our food seemingly get worse and worse, more ultra-processed food. We're seeing about 70% of food on average now is ultra-processed for a lot of kids, which is, really, really unfortunate. We're seeing more screen time, again, less being outside, more toxins. So just really everything from a basic common sense standpoint going in the wrong direction.
So I was curious, you had mentioned a scientist, Paul Thornton, who had proven that there was no link between vaccinations and autism, but he was actually indicted in 2011 for embezzling from CDC, allegedly. Can you talk about why that's important?
Yeah. So I guess, going back a little bit for me, I'm a pediatrician and I work in the integrative space. And something that I've been getting a lot of questions about over the years really has been vaccines. And unfortunately, with that topic, it was so censored for so long. I mean, you couldn't really talk about it and it got really frustrating. And certainly during the pandemic, I also got very frustrated. And that really led me to want to start talking about vaccines a little bit more and doing a little bit more research and really doing a deep dive into it. And that's what led me to write my book, Between a Shot and a Hard Place. And I would say during that exploration is where I really first heard his name, Paul Thornton. And that was really in relation to some of the research around vaccines and MMR and vaccines and autism, really kind of the main research that he was, or some of the main research that he was involved in, and some of the real big studies that are often used to, air quotes, like debunk that link or to at least refute it in some way. And what's really interesting about him is that he was indicted, like you mentioned, for fraud, basically. So allegedly, he stole millions of dollars from the CDC, kind of funneled money to himself, and from what they said, like outside of the research that they were supposed to be doing on vaccines and autism. And so was indicted here, but then was never really brought to justice or at least tried. Kind of, I'm not sure of all the details, but basically it was in Europe somewhere. They had him on a list, but hadn't really done anything about it until recently. Apparently, he was apprehended recently, like in the last few months, and now they're talking about putting him on trial for this. So why it's relevant is the reality that you have this research that's so sacred in terms of the vaccines autism research, but then you have somebody who's a part of that research who is indicted for fraud and maybe committed that fraud. I mean, I guess we'll have to wait and see what the trial, but ultimately, individuals of that nature, who knows what else they did in a fraudulent way, right? If you're committing that kind of fraud, then how do you know that the research was sound? How do you know that they didn't affect the research in some way, didn't do something that was fraudulent on that? So there were many other authors. It doesn't mean that the research that he was a part of was fraudulent in any way, but it certainly calls it into question. And when you have a few main studies that are used all the time, and you have one of the main authors who's under scrutiny in this kind of way, I think that's a very big deal and something that should be noted.
I like what you say on your social media. Not pro, not anti, just the facts. It seemed like for a while there, science was not about asking questions. It was just about accepting things on what we were told. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it a lot of discussion was censored. I mean, it still is, but not nearly as much as it used to be. Certainly, the word vaccine was highly censored. Was very difficult to discuss, and anybody that did, even if you just asked questions, you'd be kind of deplatformed and branded as someone who's anti-vax or crazy just for asking questions. And so it really led to people not really asking questions, kind of being afraid for their careers. And I think that's a big problem because there shouldn't be anything that we can't talk about. There's no reason why we should be able to ask questions about vaccines, have discussions about vaccines, and just debate it. I mean, that's what we should be doing about everything that it's literally a science. You don't have to agree with my opinion. You don't have to agree with anybody's opinion. You can totally disagree, but the point should not be to censor it, to shut it down. It should be to refute it with better information. And I'm always willing to change my mind if somebody can give me information that is better than what I know. Like that's what it's supposed to be. And with the topic of vaccines, you were just never able to discuss it. And that was one of the big reasons what led me to write the book in the first place was I was just so frustrated around it and the fact that we couldn't even talk about it. And personally, I don't feel like people should be forced to do anything. That's my personal opinion. But I have people in my office that do the regular schedule, that do a slow schedule. Some people that don't do it. I just don't force them to do anything. And we talk about it and come up with a plan that makes sense for them. But ultimately, it it it's so frustrating to see that that topic is censored and that you can't discuss it because we need to be able to discuss it. And that's again why it's like it's not to push people to do a vaccine. It's just to talk about the concerns that parents have.
What are some of the uh, leading things that people are parents are talking with you about? What they're concerned about? What are some of the jewels that they get from your practice about how to raise healthier kids?
I think in terms of vaccines, they're worried about the ingredients. They're worried about the amount of vaccines. They're worried about autism and chronic conditions. So I think those are the big concerns. I think just in general, one of the big concerns is chronic illness. I mean, given that the rates are skyrocketing, about 50% of kids have a chronic illness. I think parents are very concerned about what they can do to either prevent that or support their kids or decrease the amount of times they're getting sick, those kind of things. So I think we're seeing a lot of concern around just this increase in chronic illness, and then what are the things that they might be able to do to make a difference and decrease their children's risk of being on a medication.
Who are some of the authors that you find interesting and plausible on this subject? I know Peter McCullough, um, Paul Thompson, um, Suzanne Humphreys. What are some of the authors or research scientists or doctors that you look to for information in this area? Hey guys, studies are showing that 68% of people that watch podcasts regularly don't click the subscribe button. Do me a huge favor. If you like this content, click subscribe so other people know where to go for the cool stuff. Thank you.
Well, for vaccines, I think what's really important is to read multiple sources. It's always been an issue when people have asked me like, okay, what should I read? What should I do? And the reality of the vaccine world uh, until now is it's very dichotomous. It's very one sided. It's very extreme. Yeah, the people that are very pro the regular schedule, very pro CDC, and they write a book and it's like, oh, vaccines are the best thing ever. They never cause a problem or no issues. And then there are a bunch of other people that are more, on the, like air quotes anti-vax side, and they write something about vaccines and it's like they're the worst thing ever. You should never take it. And there's not a lot in the middle. And of course, that's one of the things that I wanted to do with my book was to be more in the middle. But I do think you need to read multiple things to get a better sense of what's going on. So I think from the very pro CDC side, Paul Offit is someone who is looked to in the medical world as someone who really knows a lot about vaccines and talks about vaccines a lot. And I've read most of his books, and they are quite good if you want that kind of CDC perspective of vaccines are the best thing ever. So that's I think kind of on one side. On the other side, you mentioned a lot of good books. So if you want like a history on vaccines, Dissolving Illusions is really good. If you want to learn about the research around vaccines and the history, then Turtles All the Way Down is really good. We don't know who the author is on that because they didn't put their name on it. But that's a really good book. Paul Thomas's books are good, though, for someone who's more in the middle, he's kind of moved more towards don't ever get a vaccine ever again. So it's kind of his perspective now, but not in his first book. His first book was a little bit more middle of the road. The latest book's a little bit more extreme. Aaron Siri is excellent. I think he's a really good, balanced, reasonable individual. He's a lawyer. He's done a lot of the lawsuits when it comes to vaccines, and I think his new book is extremely reasonable and extremely detailed, and he's very factual because he's a lawyer. So I think that's another good book and something you can look to.
Yeah, you had mentioned he was in front of the Senate, I believe, fairly recently with the Henry Ford Center study.
Yeah, he was a part of that discussion, and I think that's a big deal, a big study that I think a lot more is going to come. I don't know if you've seen the film or not, the recent film, but it's really good, inconvenient study on that. And getting. Did you see it or did you not
I
see
have
it?
not seen it yet.
Okay, so yeah, it's really interesting because with actually let me maybe not everyone knows the study, so let me talk about that and then I can kind of move through. So the Henry Ford study, so basically what happened was there was the head of infectious disease, really prominent individual, has done lots of research before, very pro-vaccine, agreed to do a study of vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids about 5 years ago or so, used the Henry Ford data set, which is a large data set. They have tons of kids, millions of kids. They follow them for many years as a very well-respected location. And so he did that study at vaccinated versus unvaccinated, had about 18,000 kids, 2,000 unvaccinated. And when he completed the research, he did it. He wrote a whole paper, basically showed that kids that are unvaccinated were overall much healthier, had a lot lower rates of chronic disease, basically on every single almost all of them, 2, 4, 6 times the rate of chronic conditions in the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated kids. And did a lot of sensitivity analysis to try their best to eliminate confounders, deal with some of the issues that are always with the vaccine research. So quite a good study, I think, from what I've seen. And then it was never published. And so there was a lot of controversy around this study because it really kind of leads back to the concerns around the vaccine literature, which are, anytime anybody finds any problems potentially with a vaccine, then the research gets silenced, it gets debunked, the authors lose their jobs, whatever it is. And so this kind of brought that up again because this individual didn't publish it, or Henry Ford didn't publish it. So there's a lot of kind of rumor spreading around it. The Inconvenient study just came out. It's a documentary on this. And in that, they actually got hidden camera footage of the lead investigator, which is Del Bigtree, talking to this lead author, and it's very clear when you hear him talking about it. He just was afraid, like he just didn't want to do it. It wasn't hidden per se. It wasn't like Henry Ford Center didn't want the information to come out, even that's what it seems like the media is talking about. He just didn't want to do it. He didn't want to lose his career. He knew that he was going to get raked over the coals for this, and just he's near the end of his career, just didn't want to do it. And it's unfortunate because it would be really helpful to have this study, but ultimately I understand it's a really tough position to be in. And he knows that, and he's not shy. This isn't a shy guy. Like, this is a guy who was dealing with Flint, Michigan water. He was kind of a whistleblower on that. He was someone who put out a study on hydroxychloroquine during COVID and got a lot of flack for that. So it's not someone who's shy to controversy and yet refused to put this out there. And there are limitations on every retrospective study, but realistically, this is quite a good study compared to what's out there and should be out there in the literature, so that way it can be replicated, it can be looked at. You can try to redo it in other places, see if those studies hold. It's not conclusive in any way. It's one study, but it's important that if there are signals of chronic conditions, then we do look into that and start asking why and making sure that that is or isn't true. So that's why it's such an important study. And kind of circling back to Aaron Siri, so he was testifying. They were talking about this recently because there's a lot of discussion around vaccines these days with Secretary Kennedy, and trying to look at the schedule and see if we need to make changes and seeing if it's related to chronic illness. And so that's again why this study is so important. Why they're talking about it, because it's potentially the best evidence that there is a concern, and it's not even published.
What resources do you have for people to stay updated with what you're doing, what you're learning? Parents that might want to reach out and get in touch. I know you're well known for your popular Instagram channel, Dr. Joel Gator. Where else can people get support or guidance? Or I think you even have some weekly newsletters or groups.
Yeah, that's so. I mean, the book. If you want to get a general overview, I think the book is a really good resource between a shot and a hard place. I put out lots of posts, a couple posts every day on Instagram, X. So that's a good place, Dr. Joel Gator, and then my Substack. So I try to put out a daily or almost daily newsletter, and that's been very popular lately, mostly on vaccines, but on child's health in general. And it's been really interesting and exciting to see. I mean, it's been really popular. It's been number one on Substack for health, often many times over the last few months. It's been jumping up the charts just because I think people are really interested in learning about vaccines, and I'm trying to put information out there. And I'm very surprised how well it's doing. But it's been really interesting to see how engaged people have been and how interested parents are in learning more about vaccines. And I try to be balanced. I try to not come at it from pushing anybody to do anything. It's really just information. If we're talking about ingredients, or we're talking about stories, and I put a story out about the polio vaccine a little bit ago from 100 years ago, like just different things, different piece of information that people might not know, but trying to kind of show both sides of the information.
I was surprised to learn from Susan Humphrey's book that much of polio was eradicated and potentially due to the harmful effects of
DDT. Yeah.
DDT.
DDT.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Uh, and much of it had been eradicated prior to the vaccine even coming online. Is that your understanding?
My understanding with polio is it's extraordinarily complicated, and I don't think we know. I think it's so confusing, the history on polio, because you have all sorts of different histories, and I think the reality of it is extraordinarily complicated, and we probably never know. And the reason being is, if you go back to before the, let's say, 50s, they didn't really have testing like we have now. So polio was really just diagnosed based on symptoms and based on paralysis. But there are many reasons why you could have paralysis. And I think that we now think of polio as poliovirus, as an infection that you get. But that's not the way that it was diagnosed back then. And there are many reasons why you could have paralysis. I mean, we know just from a viral standpoint, there are many other viruses that can cause paralysis that's as similar to polio now. But even then, there were all sorts of things that were sprayed, chemicals like DDT. People were using mercury and arsenic as medications. Like, there are many reasons why you could have bad paralysis. And so at that point, there was a lot of fear around an infection, but they didn't even really know if it was. And then later, we had better diagnosis. We could test for the infection. And the reality of polio is that the vast majority, like 99 point whatever percent, it causes mild illness. So most of it doesn't cause paralysis. It's still possible, but it's really rare. So I think a lot of what we think of as polio wasn't actually polio virus. It's something else. That's just really hard to know, because you how do we know what exactly happened 100 years ago other than what was documented? So I think it's just interesting, because there's just a lot of history. If you read something like Dissolving Illusions, or Moth and the Iron Lung is another really good book on polio, and just kind of an alternate history. And yeah, I don't know that it's conspiracy theory, but I think it's more of like just interesting historical notation around polio, which is like, wow, this is interesting. This makes sense. This could be logical. Like, we're never going to probably exactly know, but I think if you're interested in that topic, or interested in history, then it's a very fun read, I think, in terms of like you kind of going through the thought process of like, well, that kind of makes a lot of sense. That's interesting. Like it could be that, and I think that gives you a different opinion on polio. And not that we, want polio, but I think it gives you a very different opinion of how scared we should be and how realistic our history lesson about polio actually is, which is pretty far from what the individuals who really look into it conclude. And, I had no idea of any of this stuff before
You know,
they look at
that's an
tools.
interesting coincidence. I was going through my library of books and I was pulling out a book from a well-known doctor named Beeler, uh, way back in the day, and I happened to look on a thing on polio, and it said that most cases of polio don't result in paralysis, which I just thought was, an interesting piece of history and very interesting.
Yeah, I think we're taught to be afraid of polio because of those scary images, but we don't even know how much of those images have anything to do with polio virus. And even still, for the polio virus, way more than 99%, I think, from what I've seen of polio viruses is basically asymptomatic or very mild stomach bug. So the paralysis, the scary thing, death is extremely, extremely rare. It does call into question, like, hey, if we just didn't have a polio vaccine and everyone got polio, like how many people would actually get really sick from this? And I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not interested to find out, but I think that I would wonder, how scary is polio actually versus how scared we are. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that we will, unless polio comes back, I guess.
So, what are some of the lifestyle issues that you're finding to be the most impactful for families and children? Would it be something like lack of exercise or lack of sunlight or too much blue light or um, you mentioned zinc also, which obviously many people have cited as being very helpful for getting over cold and flu, or at least quicker. Um, can you comment in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I think all that you mentioned is important. I would say if there's one thing, it's food. I think our food is, I mean, we're eating way too much ultra processed food. We're not eating enough whole food. We're not cooking enough. We're not eating fresh local produce, in general. So I think if there's one thing that you can do, it's really to focus on your diet and to make sure that we're getting the best possible food and cooking as much as possible. So you know the exact ingredients and you're getting more of the nutrients because we're literally built of what we eat. And if you're not getting those nutrients from food, and you're not, you're like they said, like zinc, like there, zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D, all these things are super important for our health. And you can supplement, but it's not the same, I don't think. And I think it's really important to get these from your food, get sunlight for vitamin D, and that's really the most powerful part of our immune system and our health. So that's really important. Yeah, sure. I mean, exercise is also super important. Getting good sleep is super important. They're all important. But I think if there's one thing I would focus on, it's food.
Um, what are your concerns about glyphosate in the food?
I think that's a important consideration. I think anything that's sprayed on our food, any toxins or chemicals can affect us. I think glyphosate's a big issue just because of how common it is, how much it's sprayed, and we know that it's concerning and toxic. So I think that's a concern. But I think it's gotten maybe too much of the publicity where I think the bigger story here is all the stuff that's sprayed in our food, and the question of what that's doing to us. Because it's not just glyphosate, it's all the other chemicals, all the other pesticides, even the things that are considered organic and that's sprayed on food. Is that even better? So I think we have a big job to do over the next decade or 2 decades to really look into all these chemicals that we're spraying on our food and see how that's affecting our gut and affecting us in general. It's a big problem, and we don't want we want to protect our food system, but there's a cost to that, and this mass production is I think leading to all sorts of issues. And the only way to do that is to spray it down a bunch of chemicals to stop the bugs from eating it, to make sure that it doesn't go bad, preservatives. So I think all of these things together can lead to health effects. And I don't think we have any idea exactly what that's doing. And so the real only answer to that is to try to get more local food that doesn't need all these chemicals, and try to at least have some portion of your diet be from those too.
What do you wish all parents knew about raising a healthy child?
I wish that parents knew that we have to take health into our own hands. I don't think the medical system is certainly equipped at this point to focus on health and prevention. I think medicine's much more focused on treatment, and that's important too. But if medicine's really pharmaceutical at this point, and focus on treating serious disease, but not really focused on prevention and not really focused on nutrition and diet and sleep. And I hope that changes. But for right now, parents really have to take those things into their own hands because they're not generally going to get a lot of guidance on that in their 3 to 5 minute visits at their doctor's office.
What are parents often, from your day to day, week to week, month to month experience, often surprised about regarding raising healthy kids?
Mm, I think they're often surprised at how much power they actually have over their children's health. I think that parents feel like what they do doesn't matter sometimes, and it really does. Really, the food that you eat, the stuff that you buy, the discussions that you have, the model that you present to them, all these things matter in terms of building habits because while we talk about things like glyphosate or a certain vitamin, ultimately it's the general day-to-day health that's really going to be the long-term predictor. I think, like, how we eat. Do we eat healthy food? Do we get exercise? One day one cake is not going to make a difference really, but it's what we're doing on a general daily basis, so those decisions do matter. And I think if you are focused on health and consider that when you're making decisions, then ultimately that's going to get you the farthest because it's a cumulative effect.
Do you go at all into the mental emotional aspects of child development, or are you
Yeah,
Muslim?
sometimes. Yeah, we can talk about it if you
And
have
and
questions about that.
and what are the main areas that you see benefiting kids if there's adjustments made in these areas?
I think we're seeing so much stress and anxiety these days, and I think one of the biggest, I don't know, it's easiest, but one of the most actionable areas is just screen time and phones and social media. That is a big topic of discussion, I would say, over the last 2 years or so, and it's great. I mean, I think we're moving in a much better direction. I think we finally acknowledged that there is some significant harm, or potential for harm with social media and with phones all day and scrolling all day, and a lot of, well, many countries are starting to outlaw phones in schools. Many states, many districts are starting to outlaw phones in school, and I think that's a good thing. I don't see how you could possibly pay attention in school if you're just scrolling all day. There's so much on there; it makes you stressed. Your friends are posting stuff. It's a lot more interesting to look at your phone than to do your math homework in general. So I think it's good that we're moving away from that. That we're prioritizing, being present. I think that's really important, and I think it's important to make it okay for parents to say no to phones that have an internet. I think we have to push that back. It's not good for anybody's mental health, I don't think, or social media, but certainly for kids that are developing, it's even more damaging. And I think there's no chance that they're gonna uh, have a good mental state if they're on social media all the time. It's just really stressful. It's built for that. So I think pushing that back as long as you can is really helpful. And the more that parents do that, the more that it's socially acceptable amongst kids. And I think that there's a lot of push, and I have no problem with it, to kind of move away from giving kids all these screens and giving them social media to, even if you want for safety, like a flip phone, something without an internet, I think that's okay. If I think you want to give your kid a phone just to make sure they can get a hold of you, that's fine, but they don't need to be able to go on social media with that. If you want them to have social media, you can always just have them on the computer, do that. So it's like once a day, or, once every couple of days, as opposed to all the time scrolling, and at least then they're still connected. But not really doom scrolling all day. So I think there are just actionable steps where you can find some middle ground. I don't think technology is going away. I think if all your friends have social media, it's going to be tough to stop your teens from wanting to have that. But I think you can find some reasonable middle ground to keep their mental health as good as possible while not, I guess, totally stopping them from being on it. But you also could. A lot of people are just being like, no social media till 16. But I understand that's not always the easiest for parents.
What are one or two more actionable items that you find make a big difference in raising healthy kids?
So I think sleep we haven't really talked about, and the more that I read about sleep, the more that you hear people talk about sleep, the more you realize just how important it is. And it is just something that we rarely focus on, but yet we know that we're growing, we're detoxifying during our sleep. And so, especially for kids, that's a really important time in terms of their immune function. And we also know that if you don't sleep well, how severe that is to your immune function. Like, there are studies where you have 2, 3 times the rate of infections just by not sleeping as well. So I think we know that's a really important part of our immune health and just our general mental health and function. And of course it is. I mean, why? How can you We all know this. If you don't sleep well, you're not going to be able to focus well. So I think that's a big part of school. And now, again, back to like social media or phones, it's really easy to kind of scroll for many hours at night, to be stressed out about all sorts of things. So we need to prioritize that sleep, have a nice routine before bed, get those screens out of the bedroom, and certainly not get on the phone right before bed. I think that really helps for kids for sleeping, especially if they're stressed or anxious. So I think that's one big factor. And what else have we talked about? I mean, toxins I haven't talked too much about, but I think, besides food toxins, I think there are all kinds of other toxins that we need to think about as well. So anything we put on our skin, anything we bring in our home, the clothes that we buy, what's it sprayed in? What water are we drinking? Do you have a filter? Do you have an air purifier if you're living somewhere that has, not the best air? Like all these things can add up. And again, we're not going to get rid of all toxins, but can we minimize that burden on the body a little bit to help it stay in balance? I think that's really important. And there are many things that you can do to decrease that a little bit if you're focused on it when you make purchases.
Those are huge factors. And do you have any kind of resource list of purifiers that you like, or water filters, or
I don't know. It always changes, but I think that, as long as you're getting something, it's better than nothing. So I think you got to figure out what works for you in the context of your budget. But ultimately, if you live somewhere where the water's not the best, then some sort of water filter is going to be better than nothing. Some sort of air purifier can be helpful. I mean, there's so many different companies and so many different types out there, but ultimately, having some support in your home potentially can be helpful, depending on what the issues are. So I think just identifying where your concerns are, or just getting some basic, filters would be helpful.
and skin products are huge. I mean, obviously we absorb so much from our skin. I mean, I know there's apps for that to check and see how clean certain products are. Do you have recommendations as to where to go to find what good products are out there?
Yeah, EDA, Environmental Working Group has a good one. Yaka is another good, for checking products. So there are a few different apps and programs, but ultimately, I think for most people, they might want to do it for a little bit, but then they don't end up sticking with it. So I think the key really is just reading labels. I think if you're reading labels and everything, if you don't know what the ingredients are, don't buy that thing. Buy things with ingredients that you do know, and you're going to get much farther.
But with skin products, does anybody understand the ingredients?
Sometimes. I mean, I think, depends on what you're reading. I mean, there are things that are like avocado oil or tallow or calendula, and I think you can look and see that you understand that, most of the ingredients, are there real things in there? Are there essential oils? The more natural in general, I think the safer. Not always true, right? Obviously, natural doesn't always mean safe, but if there isn't a whole long list of chemicals that you don't know, it's probably better than not. And if there are ingredients on them that you don't know, then you can start to look them up. I mean, we're lucky; we can Google them. You can see like, what is this? Why is it in there? And that is a way to kind of start learning about things. But yeah, there are products that you do know the ingredients to, not always. But if you start to be mindful of it, then maybe you're buying products where you at least know more of the ingredients.
Are there any frustrating myths that people commonly believe and you go, "Oh my gosh, I wish people didn't think that because it's so clear that it's actually the other way?"
I mean, I think when it comes to vaccines, it's just that there's like one side, or two different sides. I think we we all want healthy kids, and I think that it's not woo woo to ask questions, and the research is not as clear as people want to make it out to be. And so people that have questions, parents that have questions, they should be able to ask those questions.
Isn't one of the difficulties with evaluating the long-term effects of vaccines, we don't have much of a control group because so many people have been vaccinated?
It makes it more difficult to do, but it's not impossible. You could study, if you're doing retrospective studies, you have big data sets. There are enough kids that are unvaccinated in there that you could look at them. You could do prospective trials and follow some kids. There are plenty of people that would volunteer for a study. I think if somebody did it, they were unvaccinated. So it's possible to do it. It's not, easy, but to do a randomized trial would probably not happen because it'd be unethical to force people to do vaccines and also to not give people vaccines. That's is regarded as unethical. So to do the best kind of study would be very difficult and pretty much impossible. But there are other versions of studies that you could do, that do look at it, so it's possible to be done.
It would seem that a long-term study with a control group would be one of the conclusive ways to sort of get some solid information. So it is interesting that there aren't more of those that are widely distributed and accepted.
Yeah, I mean, it's never been done, so it needs to be. I mean, I think that's where we are, and that's my position is. There have been plenty of retrospective studies. There's plenty of argument and debate in the vaccine world. And the way to actually resolve a lot of that debate is to now say, look, we need these prospective studies. We have to follow kids forward. Let's do 10 of them. Let's do them all over the world. Let's spend the money. I know it's expensive to do it, but I think we need to do it. There are plenty of people that will volunteer for these kinds of studies, and let's see what happens. I want to know. I don't know the answer. I don't know, how vaccines are affecting kids in a negative way potentially, and I think that we need to know that. And ultimately, if you run 10 of those studies and all of them show the same thing, and all of them show that vaccinated kids are just as healthy as unvaccinated kids, and it doesn't cause autism, it doesn't cause chronic disease, that's the information that's going to make parents comfortable to do it. So you want to have more people do vaccines. I think the way to do it is to actually get the research that they want, and to prove it, to prove the safety. Or if you do find concerns, then figure out why those concerns happen and then adjust the vaccines to make them safer. I mean, who doesn't want safer vaccines? Like, you want to protect kids from disease, but you also want to minimize any side effects. And the way to do that is not to say they're just totally safe. It's to study them and to say, let's have some humility. We've made better vaccines over the years. We can continue to make things better. We can always have better products that work better, that are safer. So why not study it in that way to try to improve things in the future? And maybe there's some that we just don't need anymore. Maybe we don't need as many of some of them. Maybe we can change some of the ingredients. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but ultimately we want the best products possible for our kids, and there shouldn't be anything anti-science or anti-vaccine about that. Why would we not want a better, safer product? That's what we want for everything.
And isn't science supposed to be about questioning and testing on an ongoing basis? Because it's not like we understand reality perfectly at any point in time.
Of course. And that's what's so crazy about the vaccine world is a lot of the people that are called anti-vax are actually people that want more science. Like, it's not crazy woo-woo people. I mean, there's some people that are quite out there about any topic, but a lot of the people that have concerns around vaccines are parents that had a kid that had a bad reaction, or at least that they think had a bad reaction to a vaccine. They kind of believe that the vaccine caused their kids to have serious problems. They could be right, they could be wrong, but it's not an anti-vaccine person. It's literally someone who went and took their kid to get a vaccine, and they feel like that their kid had a bad reaction to that. That's important information. Like, they could be wrong. You could have got a vaccine this morning, have a heart attack this afternoon, and it has nothing to do with it. But if a bunch of people get heart attacks in the same day as they take a medical product, you should look into it as a potential reason why it happened. So it's not crazy. These people are not crazy, or we were out there anti-vaccine. They're just concerned parents. And these are the people we should be listening to and getting data from, and trying to figure out how real this is, and not dismissing it, but just trying to understand it.
And isn't everything about risk and reward? And in order to know, you have to know both in order to make an informed decision.
Correct. And that's what I've been fighting for since day one is I think vaccines or anything medical product, you have to weigh the risk versus the benefits. And when you don't have a full understanding of the risks, it's impossible to make a fully informed decision. And you can make an informed decision based on what we know so far, but ultimately you have to understand the risks, because just because you have a product that can have some benefit doesn't mean it's a good product to use if it has more harm, right? And the example would be, let's say something like, I don't know, the hepatitis B vaccine. If you prevent 20,000 cases of hepatitis B and 1,000 deaths, okay, that's a good benefit. But if it causes 100,000 problems and 5,000 deaths, well, on a net, that's a bad thing. So just because it has some benefit doesn't mean it couldn't have harm. And just obviously making up those numbers, but we have to understand what the harm is, because you don't want to just give a product just because it benefits some people, but then causes more harm overall. Like, the answer to that is to say, okay, well, we do want to prevent hepatitis B, but could we do it on a different product in a way where we prevent hepatitis B without causing all those problems? But we don't know what the problems are. And so you can't adjust it or make it better if we don't ever study things long term and study them cumulatively, like we actually use them. So I think that's a huge missing piece of the puzzle. That's really unfortunate for our kids, because we don't have these real discussions, and then we just keep pushing more and more vaccines without actually having the safety discussion. And we need that. We need to push back, and we need to understand the risks so we can appropriately use these medical products in the best possible, safest way.
And I believe you had mentioned in one of your posts that they were talking about the Hep B vaccine being given to newborns, and the safety trial was just 147 participants and only followed for 5 days afterwards. So
yeah, it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty insane,
that's a pretty
right?
thin study.
It's some of the things you learn when you look into the research just blow your mind, and you're like, it can't be true. Like you're like, "Ah, that there's no way that's what it was licensed based upon." And then you look. I mean, this is again, it's not woo woo out there. Like this is what is in the insert. The insert says on one of the hepatitis B vaccines. I mean, both of them have a very short safety, but it's like 147 patients and 5 days of safety monitoring. And that's what it's licensed based upon. That's the safety testing. And there isn't even a full control group for that. And you're like, that can't be everything. Like they couldn't have approved this product based on that. And then you have Aaron Siri, who had, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, requested. He thought the same thing when he was looking into this, and was like, "That can't be everything. Like there has to be more." And then when after they did that, there wasn't anything else given to them. So obviously, it's been studied more after. But that's what they licensed it based upon. And so we're giving something to newborn babies at day one, and they were based on safety testing of 5 days. Like that's nuts. That's not anti-vaccine. You're like, we need better safety testing than that if we're going to do it. I'm not saying it's not safe. I don't know if they studied it for 5 years, it might be perfectly fine and safe. I don't know, but you can't give something to a newborn and study for 5 days. Like that's insane. That's not anti anything. That's like we have to demand better science before, or what's going to stop another company from, let's say, studying something similar? Oh yeah, 5 days. Let's just give this to all newborns. No, like it needs extremely high level of safety before you do something for them.
And my understanding is also there can be lots of tests done, but if they cherry pick just the ones that make their product look the best, is that another problem?
Yeah, that's certainly a problem. I mean, they're supposed to report everything, but I mean, they're companies, so who knows what they report and don't report based on what they're testing. They
So they are supposed to report everything equally.
Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to report all your trials, but who knows if they do, right? Who knows if they cherry pick, or even if they do, they who knows they get the information back from the companies that are working on the trials for them. It's all them, so they can kind of pick and choose what they want to report, what they want to show, how they want to massage the data to make it look good, what variables they choose. So obviously, they have an interest to make their product look as good as possible. So who knows? And it's not like the the people who are looking into the vaccines, like the FDA or the CDC, are looking at the raw data. They're not getting the basic data and being like, all right, well, let's run these studies ourselves and let's see what we find. No, they're just taking what the company gives them from that data and then evaluating that. So it's a huge problem because ultimately these companies know they can show things in a certain light, and that can get things approved. So I think that's a problem. And it's not to say that people they're doing anything nefarious or they are doing anything wrong. I don't know, but I would assume that they are, because if you're a company, you want to have your product on the market. So I think that's not too crazy a leap.
Have you seen a lot of surprise from people when they find out that vaccine companies can't be held responsible because of what was signed into law under Reagan?
Yeah, I don't think anyone would really think that, right? I don't know that unless you do this research, unless you're involved in vaccines in some way, why would you have any idea that you couldn't sue them? And you wouldn't understand that that's how it works. And that is such a huge factor when it comes to vaccines because no other product works like that.
And
That's the main.
it was signed into law because there's two words there, and I might be getting them wrong, but they were necessarily unsafe or something to that degree.
Yeah, I mean, that was written in one of the documents. But I mean, the basic premise at that time was that there were a bunch of vaccine makers. There were concerns, especially mainly around the DTP, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccine. There were a lot of lawsuits popping up. And of course, with a healthy young child, if they have some sort of medical concern that is compensated for by a company, it's a massive amount of money. And so if they're getting all these lawsuits from products, then they're going to go out of business. A lot of the vaccine makers decided to stop making vaccines, and a lot of the other ones were kind of threatening to stop because it's just too liable for them to continue. So it was decided that vaccines were important at that point, and they want to keep that. So they're going to make the vaccine manufacturers not liable, or basically not liable for vaccines, and the government would be the ones that would be responsible if someone was to sue. And so that's where we still sit today with that act, where you can't sue the product, and that's a big problem because with the capitalist society and the way that things are, the real factor that kind of keeps companies in check in general is being sued for a product that causes problems. But with vaccines, you can't do that. So they really have no reason to make sure their product is safe. They have no reason to continue to evaluate for safety. Once something gets on the market, then it's just there, and you can't even sue them if there's a problem with it. So that really creates a very large imbalance in power and a big incentive to get a product on the market and not worry so much about safety. So I think that's an issue. So that's where we sit today, and we're still dealing with that.
So the US spends significantly more than I believe any other country on the planet by a significant margin per person for healthcare, and yet we have pretty not great outcomes. Why do you think that is? What do you think's wrong with the US that we're getting such bad outcomes?
I think we're focused or have been in the wrong places. I mean, we've been focused on more and more medications and less on infrastructure and the focusing on the foundations of health. And I think that's just a very very big problem. I think just the whole system from top to bottom when it comes to our health is just really really backwards. There's a lot of big priorities that we just don't focus on when it comes to health, and we're mass producing so much like we've talked about. And so we're not building cities in a way that's functional for people to really be healthy and move. Our food system is generally terrible, and we're moving away from really supporting our farmers and small farms and local produce towards mass production. We oftentimes don't really support the poor in terms of our health. There's like a huge health inequality here. There's not a lot of great access for individuals, unless you have a lot of money. So I think there's just a lot of big areas that we don't focus on, and then we have a medical focus on pills as opposed to anything else. And I think that's a massive problem. And we jump to pills really quickly, and we have a health infrastructure that just prioritizes like a factory line, quick fixes, in and out. And I think that's a huge issue. So there's just a lot of major issues that are moving in the wrong direction and are not obviously easy to fix, but really are leading to these terrible outcomes. And Yeah, I mean, we're spending a lot more and we're not seeing better outcomes. So that means we're doing a lot wrong. And it's not about not spending enough money. It's about not spending money, I think, in the right way.
What have you seen in terms of parents and trusting government organizations and institutions since you've been in practice?
Oh, I mean, it's gone, right? Trust is gone. It's decreased, significantly. I think with COVID, that was the last kind of nail in the coffin in terms of people's trust in all these organizations. And so I think now people are very distrusting in general of major health bodies, and they're kind of doing, a lot of parents are just starting to do their own thing, and that's a big problem. And that's just not woo woo out there natural minded parents. I mean, this is most people at this point are just very, at least somewhat distrusting of health organizations, and just are not sure what to do anymore. I think there's a lot of just uncertainty about where things are moving in any direction, whether you kind of love Kennedy or hate Kennedy, whether you are very mainstream health or out there. It's like I just think everyone is very confused right now.
If you had a megaphone and the whole world was listening, what would you like to say?
I would I would really like to say that I think that we need to start to come together. I think that uh, so many people agree on most things. And I think that, yes, there are certain issues that are we don't agree on, but there's a lot that we do agree on. And I think if we came together, then we could make such a big difference for our health, and we can focus on the things that we do agree upon, and push those things forward and focus and come together, especially as healthcare providers and parents. Like, we're all on the same team. And I think that if doctors can really unite with parents, and we can come together against big corporations and kind of work together, then I think we can push back. And it's not like, again, corporations are bad. They're run by people, but their job is to make money. And I think we need to identify that. I think we need to change some of the rules around lobbying in government. I think we need to change some of the rules and some of the pushback around these big corporations, and then start to focus on a little bit more local uh, and health. And I think if we did that, we could move in a much better direction. It's very possible. We've seen a lot of change even just in a short time with the new administration. And of course, some things are good and some things are not the best, and everyone agrees and disagrees on everything. But we can see change. And I think that's possible if we continue to do this.
What are you most optimistic about that's changed in the last few years?
I'm super optimistic that we're finally talking about health. I think, again, I know that not everyone loves Secretary Kennedy, but regardless of what you think, we were going in a very bad direction, and our health was falling off a cliff, and we have some of the worst health in the world in terms of the Western world, and we need change. And so, whether you agree or disagree with what's going on, It's really good that we're talking about it. It's really good that it's a focus. And I think that the fact that we are focused on this and some people are is leading to change. And overall, that's going to be a net positive, I hope, in the long run. And we can, you can quibble about this should be done, that should be done, this shouldn't be done, we shouldn't do it in this way. But ultimately, something needs to be done. So a shakeup is good, I think.
Well, Dr. Joel, thank you so much for being here with us today. What is your website, your Instagram? Of course, we'll put them in the show notes, but how can people get in touch with you? How can they keep learning from the information that you're putting out?
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. So at Dr. Joel Gator on Instagram or X, the book is Between a Shot and a Hard Place, and you can find them on Amazon or at theshotbook.com.
And if you got value from this, which we know you did, please share it with somebody who can benefit from it. Click the subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next episode of Next Level Healing. This podcast is intended for the purpose of providing information and education. It does not provide advice and is not meant to be used for any self-diagnosis or the replacement of any kind of licensed professional. The creators and individuals appearing here do not endorse any specific tests, positions, medications, products, or procedures. The views and opinions are expressed in this podcast are of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.